Her granddaughter yanked the plate from her lap, then muttered, "Did they forget to bury you?" Florence Langley didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't stay. By sunrise, her estate file would be rewritten, line by line, lock by lock. The trust she'd once opened in love was now sealed in steel. No more second chances, no more assumed entitlements, and when they came looking for the keys, they'd find her legacy had already left without them. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Florence Langley sat at the far end of the living room, her knees angled delicately toward the fireplace, a paper plate balanced on her lap. The potluck was already in full swing, paper streamers sagging across the ceiling, disposable cutlery clinking against casserole dishes, and the air thick with the scent of buffalo dip and oversweet barbecue sauce. She hadn't said much since she arrived. No one had really noticed. Not even her son David, who was currently elbow-deep in conversation about refinancing options with his brother-in-law, as if the grandmother who raised him was just another piece of furniture in the background. Florence's plate held exactly what she liked: deviled eggs, baked mac and cheese, a neat square of carrot cake from her own Tupperware that no one else had touched. She ate slowly, methodically, legs crossed at the ankle. Her cardigan, a soft oatmeal knit, hung loose on her shoulders, and her silver hair had been pinned back in its usual twist, held with the same comb she'd worn for years. She did not look weak. She looked composed. Until Amber walked over. Amber was all angles, sharp cheekbones, designer sneakers, glossy lips that never quite smiled when they spoke. She was Florence's granddaughter in blood, not behavior. Without asking, Amber reached down, snatched the plate from Florence's lap in one quick motion, and said under her breath, "Did they forget to bury you?" The comment wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. A cousin nearby coughed to cover a laugh. Someone else chuckled nervously. David didn't even look up. Florence didn't say a word. She folded her hands slowly and precisely, and stared at the empty space where her plate had been. Amber didn't even glance back as she strutted toward the kitchen, heels clicking against the tile like punctuation. Later, as Florence refilled her glass of lemon water, she overheard Amber talking to her younger cousin near the hallway. "Booked the penthouse suite for the CreatorCon weekend," Amber said, smug. "Skyline views, clawfoot tub, the works. I've already got 3 collabs lined up. It's gonna be huge." "Wasn't that like $2,000 a night?" the cousin whispered. Amber laughed. "Manifesting sweet energy. Grandpa would have helped. Grandma? She won't even notice. Might still fake an accidental transfer if I smile sweet enough." Florence didn't flinch. She just took her lemon water and returned to the corner. When it was time for dessert, she quietly picked up her empty Tupperware, slipped it into her canvas tote, and pressed a soft kiss onto David's cheek. "Heading out," she said. "I'll see you soon." David barely looked up from his phone. "Drive safe, Ma." She left unnoticed. At home, Florence changed into her cotton robe, brewed a single mug of chamomile, and took it to the den. The house was quiet now, comfortably so. She turned on the small banker's lamp by the file cabinet and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a worn blue binder, her estate file. Everything was labeled neatly: Lydia, attorney, final directives, trust designation, education fund. She turned to the tab marked distributions. Her fingers didn't tremble. They moved like clockwork. Amber Langley, 28, granddaughter Florence, stared at the name. Then, with the same grace she'd always carried, she uncapped a black felt pen and drew a single thick line through it. No anger, just resolution. She paused for a moment, then turned the page and began reviewing her trust entries. A small smile played at the corner of her lips. Some inheritances were given. Others? They had to be revoked, quietly, deliberately, and with absolute clarity. She sipped her tea, then reached for a blank envelope and wrote a name on it: Lydia. Outside, the wind moved through the branches of the oak like a whisper. Florence leaned back, eyes half-lidded. Tomorrow, the editing would begin, and no one, least of all Amber, would see the final draft coming. The elevator pinged softly on the 10th floor. Florence stepped out into the sleek, glass-paneled hallway of Westbury and Locke Legal Associates, her canvas tote in one hand, and her will, marked and annotated, in the other. The receptionist offered her a polite smile. "Miss Langley, Lydia is expecting you." Florence nodded. "Thank you, dear." Inside the office, Lydia stood when Florence entered. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed but warm-voiced, Lydia wore dark navy slacks and a cream blouse, and kept her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, like she was always halfway through analyzing something important. She offered Florence a firm handshake and gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "I'm guessing this isn't a courtesy visit," Lydia said, half grinning. "It's a correction," Florence replied, setting down her folder and folding her hands neatly. Lydia opened it and scanned the tabbed documents. "Amber Langley, full removal?" Florence nodded. "From everything. Distributions, access clauses, travel permissions. And I'd like to reroute her educational fund to a foundation that supports adult women returning to school, preferably one with limited Instagram presence." Lydia's lips twitched. "Any objections to forming a new revocable trust in the process? The clean structure will make it harder to contest. It also gives us flexibility for charitable transfers." "Let's do it." "Perfect. I'll need initials on these 3 lines and a full signature at the bottom." Lydia slid the documents across the desk. Florence didn't hesitate. Her signature flowed cleanly across the page, steady, elegant, final. Lydia added, "I can also include a clause that restricts her from accessing any trust-controlled programs, travel stipends, housing grants, continuing education sponsorships. They won't even show up on her eligibility reports." Florence smiled softly. "Good, because if she ever applies again, I want the system to return a simple word: unavailable." By the time Florence left the office, the sun had dipped just below the skyline. A subtle breeze played with the hem of her coat as she waited for her rideshare outside. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt clean. That evening, Florence made herself a light supper, avocado toast and tomato soup, and carried the tray to her reading nook. The chamomile was still steeping when her phone buzzed. "Amber, can you co-sign for the deposit? I'm short. Just $600. I'll pay it back right after CreatorCon, swear." Florence stared at the message for a long time. Then she tapped out a response. "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." She added a small smile emoji, software non-committal. Then she opened the encrypted cloud app Lydia had helped her set up and uploaded the screenshot under a folder labeled Documented Expectation. The ping confirmed receipt. Later that night, she sat by her kitchen counter with a yellow legal pad and began drafting a short handwritten note for Lydia. "Please begin processing the tuition reroute by end of week. Add new beneficiary clause language. In service, not in surname." She paused, pen hovering, then added a final line. "Include a copy of today's text from Amber, just in case." The next morning, she picked fresh hydrangeas from her small front yard and set them in a vase by the windowsill. The sun filtered in gently through the blinds, warm on her face. The silence wasn't lonely. It was intentional. Across town, Amber was likely rehearsing her influencer pitch, ironing out the details of a suite she wouldn't afford, and assuming her grandmother, quiet, cardigan-wearing Florence, would come through like she always had. But something had shifted. Florence sipped her tea, a new flavor this time: ginger lemon. She reached into the file cabinet, removed a blank envelope and wrote, "Beneficiary Revision 2, Final Draft." And as the tea cooled in her hands, her phone buzzed again. Another message, from Amber. This time, just one word. "Grandma?" Florence turned the phone over, screen side down, and let the question linger unanswered. The suite may still be booked, but the keys, already out of her hands. The hold music from the Ritz Avalon played a delicate instrumental version of "Ain't No Mountain High Enough." Florence tapped her pen against her desk in rhythm, her planner open beside her, pages marked with sticky notes and checkboxes. When the concierge picked up, his voice was crisp, professional. "Thank you for holding. This is Devon at the Ritz Avalon. How can I assist?" Florence smiled slightly. "Yes, I'd like to speak with reservations regarding an upgrade. Presidential suite, please. Top floor." A pause. "Of course, ma'am. May I confirm your name?" "Florence Langley. The stay is for the 11th through the 13th. I believe my granddaughter may have inquired previously about a reservation for those same dates. She could almost hear Devon's eyes widen behind the pause. Yes, that name has come up, but I only see a pending inquiry, no confirmed booking. Good, Florence replied. I'll be confirming it, under mine. She gave him her member number, updated her card on file, and added a few finishing touches. I'll also need chilled champagne upon arrival, and a spa appointment for Saturday morning, deep tissue massage, 90 minutes. Certainly. Anything else? Yes, I'd like a note placed on file, no access permitted to any guest under the name Amber Langley. If anyone attempts entry under that name, notify security. Devon's tone changed subtly, just a notch more respectful. We'll handle it discreetly, ma'am. Lovely. She ended the call and turned to her laptop. Within minutes, she uploaded the reservation receipt, the security clause, and the spa itinerary into her trust's encrypted cloud under the folder marked Sweet Weekend, Final Control. Florence leaned back and exhaled slowly. That afternoon, she called Margot. Margot had been her closest friend since the early teaching days, sharp as a tack, fond of dry martinis, and allergic to nonsense. I'm kidnapping you for a weekend, Florence said, her tone light. Will there be silk robes and better tea than what you serve at home? There'll be champagne and an upgraded view. Same lemon scones, though. Margot laughed. I'm in. That night, Florence saw Amber's post. A flat lay of half-zipped luggage, white sneakers tossed just so on a faux fur throw. Caption, manifesting sweet energy. No location tagged. No specifics. But Florence knew. She closed the app, sipped her evening tea, and didn't smile. Not exactly, but something inside her settled, like the soft click of a key turning only one way now. Before bed, she called Lydia. Just wanted to confirm the legal protection around travel expenditures is active. I've uploaded everything to the cloud file. Got it, Lydia said. And yes, your trust shields you from co-liability if she tries to mimic or claim linkage. She can't piggyback off your itinerary even if she tried. She will try, Florence said calmly. Let her, Lydia replied. Florence hung up, satisfied. The next morning, she set out her weekend wardrobe, a deep navy silk-wrap dress, low heels with supportive arches, and her silver comb polished to a mirror shine. She placed them in a small suitcase with practiced ease. Outside, the mail carrier walked past her fence. Inside, Florence tapped open a new note on her tablet, labeling it, Chapter 1, The Door She Couldn't Open. And as the birds rustled outside the window, she added a short line underneath. Some sweets are earned, others reserved in advance with proof of who you've always been. She locked the screen and zipped her bag. Let the 20-somethings manifest. She had a key card. The bank's glass doors gave a muted whoosh as Florence stepped inside, greeted by the synthetic chill of air conditioning and the low hum of background jazz. She'd worn her navy cardigan and brought only one folder, thin, sharp, and tucked beneath her arm like a legal dagger. A young banker in a red tie looked up. Can I help you, ma'am? Florence's voice was calm but direct. I need to speak to a fraud specialist. He hesitated, perhaps expecting confusion or vagueness, neither of which Florence delivered. Name's Florence Langley. I believe my address was used without permission on a financial application. I'd like to verify all linked accounts and formally freeze access to any that may be cross-contaminated. Within minutes, she was seated in a private cubicle with a mid-level officer named Seth. His tie was crooked, but his typing was fast. Florence slid a document across the desk, a printout of an online credit application submitted just days prior. Her street address was there, typed cleanly beneath a name that wasn't hers. Amber Langley. Florence tapped her manicured finger against the page. This is not authorized. That's my home. She does not live there, has not for over a decade, and I'd like every linked account reviewed immediately, especially any that reference this address or my previous financial history. Seth blinked. You think your granddaughter's using your address to qualify for credit? I don't think, Florence replied. I know. By the end of the appointment, she had closed one dormant account, frozen two more, and flagged a shared account, long inactive, as requiring dual authorization for reactivation. On her way home, she stopped by the post office and checked her P.O. box. 3 flyers, 1 utility bill, and a suspicious pre-approval offer addressed to Amber care of Florence Langley. She took a photo, then another, then forwarded both to Lydia with the subject line, "New entry, digital overreach." By the time she got home, Lydia had already replied, "Drafting C&D now. Will add digital fraud protection clause to trust. Suggest you back up hotel confirmations on hard drive and print secondary copies." Florence poured herself a glass of cranberry juice, added a splash of lime, and walked over to her printer. She printed every page of the suite itinerary, confirmation numbers, spa appointments, payment receipts, even the message from Devon noting that Amber Langley was not allowed on the premises. The final sheet was a screenshot of Amber's most recent social media post. The image showed a half-packed suitcase on a hotel bed, glittery heels on the floor beside it. Caption, "5 days till my power stay." Booked and blessed Florence placed the printout on top of the stack. Then she slipped all the documents into a fresh file folder and wrote, in tidy cursive across the label, "Closure Weekend, Exhibits A to Z." She placed the folder in the fireproof cabinet next to her will binder, paused for a moment, then opened her cloud vault and uploaded a backup, the digital folder she named Preemptive Peace. As the upload processed, she stared out the window. The wind moved through her hydrangeas like it had something to say. But Florence had stopped listening for messages from the outside. She was drafting her own. At dusk, she sat in her armchair with a warm compress over her knees and a quiet audiobook playing in the background. Amber's caption still buzzed faintly in her mind like a distant mosquito. 5 days till my power stay. Florence's eyes closed. "She's not wrong," she murmured to herself. "Power is coming. Just not to the person who thought she could snatch it without permission." Amber strutted into the Ritz Avalon like she owned it, or at least like she intended to film it that way. She wore platform heels and a 2-piece designer co-ord in butter yellow, her suitcase wheels clicking behind her like punctuation. Her phone was already recording in selfie mode. "Checking in for my sweet weekend, baby," she whispered to the camera, smiling wide. "This place is about to get blessed." She stopped at the front desk, flipping her sunglasses onto her head. "Hi, Amber Langley, presidential floor. Should be under Langley or Amber Langley." The front desk agent, a composed woman with a headset and ballet-flat posture, typed slowly. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I'm sorry," the woman said after a pause. "I don't see a reservation under that name. Are you sure about the dates?" Amber's laugh was brittle. Yeah, 11th through the 13th. Top floor. I sent a request like 2 weeks ago and the guy said he'd hold it while I finalized my collabs." The agent nodded. "There was an inquiry for those dates under your name, but no payment was submitted. That floor is now fully reserved." Amber blinked. "Okay, then who took it?" The woman hesitated, then offered with professional coolness, "Ms. Florence Langley has reserved the entire floor, including the presidential suite." It took a full 5 seconds for the words to land. "My grandmother?" Amber hissed. The agent said nothing, but the small nod was confirmation enough. Amber's voice raised an octave. No, that's not possible. She doesn't even know what a clawfoot tub is. This must be some kind of mix-up." Security had already begun drifting casually toward the desk, alerted by tone and tension. Amber leaned forward, trying to peer past the counter. "Look, she probably messed something up. Just call the room. I'll talk to her." The front desk agent's smile was unshakable. "Unfortunately, there's a note on the account. Ms. Florence Langley has requested no visitors or messages from anyone under the name Amber Langley." Amber's lips parted like she'd been slapped. What? "No, I booked this. I planned this." "I'm afraid the floor is currently restricted to registered guests only." Amber's hands curled into fists at her sides, glitter acrylics gleaming like claws. "This is ridiculous. I have followers coming here. I'm working." Security stepped forward, now positioned gently but firmly on either side. One of them, an older gentleman with kind eyes and steel patience, spoke softly. "Ma'am, we'll have to ask you to wait outside if you don't have an active reservation." Amber looked between them, eyes wide, her cheeks flushed with the panic of performance collapsing. Inside the suite, Florence reclined in her spa robe, sipping peppermint tea from fine china, her feet tucked into plush slippers. Margot sat opposite her, flipping through a glossy magazine. "Sounds like the storm's arrived," Margot murmured, tilting her head toward the faint sound of raised voices in the hallway. Florence didn't look up. She took a slow sip and set her cup down with the precision of someone who had learned how to wait out chaos. A moment later, her phone rang. "Amber," Florence answered, voice even. "Yes? You're ruining everything!" Amber's voice screeched through the speaker, half wet with fury, half drenched in disbelief. "This was my moment." Florence tilted her head, eyes still on the window. The skyline glittered beyond the suite's massive windows, serene and untouchable. "No, darling," she said, "just editing my guest list." She ended the call before Amber could respond. Outside, Amber stood frozen, phone still clutched in her hand, security now politely guiding her toward the exit. Her heels caught on the rug, her pride cracked beneath her gloss. Back inside, Florence tapped her encrypted folder, adding a final PDF from the hotel's concierge, a time-stamped security note confirming access restriction had been enforced as requested. She named it, "Gate Closed." Then she stood, walked toward the balcony, and stepped into the fresh evening air. The wind lifted the hem of her robe like a curtain. Far below, a yellow cohort disappeared into the night. Florence turned her back to the city and closed the door. Amber's Instagram stories pulsed under the familiar ring of over-processed filters. She stood outside the Ritz-Avalon's front gate, one heel off, phone angled to show just enough facade for illusion. Caption, "Some people can't stand to see you win manifest anyway, energy unmatched." No mention of Florence, no tag, just enough ambiguity for her followers to fill in the gaps and assume victimhood. In her world, perception was 9/10 of the battle, and Amber planned to stage her loss like it was a sabotage. Inside the suite, Florence was unfazed. She scrolled right past the story, her reading glasses perched low as she sipped fresh cucumber water. Her spa appointment reminder pinged on the tablet beside her. Private suite massage, 10:30 a.m. "Time to invest in recovery," she murmured. Margot smirked from across the room. "You mean revenge?" Florence shook her head, rising to stretch. "No, dear, just a recalibration." Downstairs, the spa was candlelit and citrus-scented. Florence undressed calmly, folded her robe into a perfect square, and lay face down on the heated table as the masseuse began to knead the tension from her shoulders. Outside, a storm of filtered outrage was trying to gain traction, but inside the suite, everything slowed to breath and balm. Meanwhile, at the hotel entrance, Amber's latest trick arrived. His name was Troy, chiseled jaw, faux designer jacket, and the unearned swagger of someone who'd never had to wait in line. He strolled toward the elevator, phone in hand, nodding confidently at the concierge. "I'm meeting Florence Langley. She's expecting me." The concierge didn't blink. "One moment, sir." In less than 30 seconds, security reappeared. Same older gentleman as before, same velvet rope composure. "Sir, you're not on the guest list. Ms. Langley's reservation includes a no-access clause for unregistered visitors." "I just need to drop something off," Troy insisted, flashing a grin that had probably worked on dozens of doorways. "Then you'll need to use the lobby delivery desk. This way, please." By the time Amber's boyfriend was politely escorted out, she was pacing behind a hedge, live-streaming to her followers in whispered indignation. "This place is a mess, y'all. I'm being blocked, literally. Like, there are rules against family now?" But her followers had questions. "Wait, weren't you the one who was getting the suite? What happened to your big stay? Your grandma's in the presidential floor?" Amber ended the stream with a pout and a claim of bad service vibes, then texted Florence with forced control. "You've gone too far. No emojis. Just that." Direct and sour. Florence read it as she reclined again in her suite, feet up, robe fluffed, her pulse as even as the jazz playing through the suite's Bluetooth system. She didn't reply. Instead, she tapped out a short email to Lydia. Subject, "Finalize it. Please file full disinheritance confirmation by end of week. Trust documentation is backed up and verified. FL. She attached the hotel documents again, just in case. From the couch, Margot scrolled through Amber's story and snorted. "You're trending in the quietest way possible." Florence raised an eyebrow. "Silent impact is still impact," she replied. Then she opened her own social media app, long dormant, barely followed. She updated her profile photo, a simple shot from the suite balcony, skyline behind her, wind in her silver hair. One post, just words, white on black, unburied, unbothered. She hit share and closed the app. As the sun lowered over the city, Florence walked barefoot to the suite's balcony and watched the gold light splash across the skyline like a reward for waiting. The suite smelled faintly of lavender and old hardwood. There were no knocks, no calls, only stillness. And yet, below the surface, the fracture lines had deepened. Amber would escalate, Florence knew that. But now there was a record, a digital wall, and a growing distance between entitlement and outcome. Back on the nightstand, Florence's phone buzzed once. A final ping. Amber again. "You've gone too far." Florence turned the phone over, face down, and this time she didn't even glance at the screen. Florence's inbox chimed as sunlight cracked through the balcony drapes. The suite still smelled faintly of bergamot and eucalyptus oil from yesterday's spa steam. She wrapped a cashmere shawl over her robe, crossed the room barefoot, and opened her tablet. Subject, C&D packet ready for review. From Lydia Hall. Attached, formal cease and desist letter addressed to Amber Langley, citing digital misrepresentation, financial overreach, and public slander, served electronically and scheduled for certified physical delivery. Florence read every word carefully, sipping the last of her morning tea. Lydia's tone was firm without being cruel, precise like a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. It would hold up in court, and more importantly, it would hold Amber at the line Florence had drawn and reinforced with steel. She clicked download, then print. While the printer hummed, Florence opened her camera roll and began scrolling through screenshots. Every Instagram caption, every hashtag hint, every desperate attempt to claim Florence's reservation or imply support had been neatly archived. She emailed them all to Lydia, each image time-stamped and sorted by date. Subject, supplemental evidence, digital misrepresentation. Then she added, also attaching updated estate distribution as discussed. Amber is now formally removed from all clauses, direct or implied. Confirmed backup printed. Florence reached into her leather folder and pulled out the newest version of her trust summary. She signed the bottom with her usual flourish, then opened to the final page, the message section. In quiet, deliberate cursive, she wrote, "To those who serve, not steal." She folded the paper, slid it into the document sleeve, and locked it in the fireproof case next to her will. By noon, brunch was laid out in the suite's dining alcove, quiche, scones, local marmalade, and 2 flutes of sparkling elderflower tonic. Margot popped a grape into her mouth and raised her glass. "To peace," she said, clinking gently against Florence's. "And permanent removals." Florence chuckled softly. "And well-documented exits. Do you think she knows she's legally sealed out?" "She will by morning," Florence replied, "once the courier gets to her doorstep." They dined slowly, savoring the food, the light, the hush that followed closure. Downstairs, a crowd of influencers buzzed with ring lights and brand pitches, but none of it reached the top floor. Florence was already floating above it. After brunch, she opened her grant portfolio and added a final line item, $15,000 earmarked for a tuition fund supporting women over 60 returning to school. The notation was brief, "Because worth doesn't retire." She hit submit, then set the screen aside and stretched her legs across the chaise lounge. The phone buzzed once more. No name. Just a number. Blocked or not, Amber was persistent. Florence opened her firewall settings and added a digital lock to her estate's online portal. No viewing, no editing, no access unless explicitly granted through Lydia's office. Even searches by IP would bounce off now. She watched the progress bar finish uploading the changes, then tapped Activate. A soft click sounded from the suite door, Margot returning from a quick walk. Well, all gates closed, Florence said simply. Digital, financial, and emotional. Margot nodded approvingly. You didn't just remove her flow, you wrote her out with punctuation. Florence stood, gathered her tablet and planner, and zipped them into her tote. Outside, clouds were building. Not a storm, just shade. She moved to the suite's balcony one last time, let the breeze lift her hair slightly, and watched a flock of birds scatter from a nearby rooftop like someone had clapped. Freedom always started in small wing beats. Back inside, her tablet buzzed again. A new message appeared on screen. Not from Amber. Unknown sender. Attempted access blocked. IP flagged. Florence stared at it, then quietly, satisfied, tapped archive. The invitation arrived tucked inside a navy blue envelope with gold foil accents and a return label that screamed curated elegance, Langley and Company. PR events. Florence turned it over twice before opening it. Inside, a tri-fold card on heavy cardstock announcing a gala to benefit emerging voices in social media philanthropy. At the bottom, in smaller script, hosted in partnership with Amber Langley. Suggested donor tier, gold patron. Florence set the card down, her expression unreadable. Amber hadn't even bothered to email directly. Just leveraged Florence's mailing address from old fundraiser lists, hoping she'd attend and drop 5 figures for clout. A second envelope arrived the next day. This one clearly a formality. We'd be honored to have you as a legacy guest. Kindly RSVP. Florence replied online. One word, attending. No notes, no +1. That Friday she arrived precisely at 7:02 p.m. No fanfare, no paparazzi. Just the soft glide of a black sedan pulling curbside, and Florence stepping out in a dark velvet gown, midnight blue with structured shoulders and a vintage brooch nestled just below her collarbone. Her silver hair was pinned back in a sleek twist. Pearl studs, no necklace, nothing to prove. Amber spotted her almost instantly, from across the ballroom, through a sea of ring lights and champagne flutes. Her face faltered mid-conversation with a TikTok skincare influencer. She blinked, as if willing Florence into a hallucination. Florence didn't look at her. She handed her invitation to the usher, who barely glanced before offering a deep, respectful nod. Right this way, Ms. Langley. She was escorted past the entrance banners and into the glow of chandeliers. And soft jazz. The gala had all the predictable trappings: minimalist centerpieces, monogrammed programs, half-enthused donors tapping through Instagram between speeches. Florence made no announcement. She found her seat, front row, reserved for legacy contributors. Amber hovered across the room, glancing over every few seconds, waiting for Florence to approach. Florence never did. When the keynote speaker took the stage, a murmur rose in the crowd. It was Dr. Cynthia Monroe, best-selling author and Florence's former mentee from the early days of community grant advocacy. Cynthia spotted Florence from the podium and offered a subtle nod. "Before I begin," she said into the mic, "I want to acknowledge a woman who mentored me when no one else would take my calls, whose idea of generosity has nothing to do with hashtags and everything to do with backbone. Ms. Florence Langley, thank you for teaching me the difference between public giving and private integrity." A round of applause followed. Amber clapped too, but slowly, awkwardly, like she wasn't sure if she was being included or replaced. As the keynote shifted to the topic of legacy and equity, Cynthia said something that landed like glass on marble. No bloodline guarantees an inheritance. It must be earned, not assumed. Gasps from a few tables, smirks from others. Florence rose, not in protest, but in calm punctuation. She made her way down the aisle, quiet as velvet, her heels barely echoing against the floor. Amber stepped forward, finally, her hand half lifted, voice catching. "Grandma, wait, are you leaving?" Florence didn't pause. She turned slightly, just enough to meet her granddaughter's eyes. "I wasn't your +1, she said softly. "Don't assume I'll stay for your encore." Then she exited before dessert. The doorman opened the car door without asking her name. Inside the car, Florence let out a small breath. Not relief. Release. As the vehicle pulled away, she glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. Amber stood alone, lips parted, applause fading behind her like borrowed sound. Back at the suite, Florence stepped out of her heels and reached for her tablet. She opened her notes app and typed a new entry. Title, Not Your Encore. Then she locked the screen and poured herself one last glass of elderflower tonic. Florence had already stepped into the corridor when she heard Amber's voice behind her, quieter now, desperate but laced with old habits of entitlement. "Grandma, wait. You don't have to do this." Florence stopped, turned, and delivered the last words Amber would hear from her in person. "You evicted yourself, Amber." Then she stepped into the elevator, calm as a held breath. The gala's noise, its rented glitter, its borrowed applause, faded behind her like a theater closing its curtain. By the time Florence reached the curb, her driver was already waiting. No valet scramble, no need to announce herself. She slid into the back seat, and the car rolled away. Amber didn't follow, but her bitterness did. That night, Florence's name trended briefly on a private influencer gossip thread. Amber posted a filtered photo of herself holding a champagne flute with the caption, "Some people confuse boundaries with betrayal. Das still standing and family is messy." Florence didn't see it, but Lydia did, and within an hour, Amber received a formal cease and desist stamped with the Langley estate insignia and a warning line in bold, "Any further misrepresentation will result in injunctive relief." Amber didn't post again for 2 days. Florence, meanwhile, packed a small weekend bag and boarded a morning train out of the city. No destination tagged online, no itinerary shared, just a paper ticket, a woven scarf, and the kind of peace no platform could monetize. She arrived at Seaforth Bay by dusk. The inn smelled like lemonwood and salt. Her room overlooked the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed like old stories refusing to sink. There were no suite upgrades, no velvet lounges, just quiet linens, a handwritten welcome note, and the hush of dignity. The next morning, Florence sat on the veranda wrapped in her travel shawl, editing her will one final time. She added a clause beneath the beneficiary list. "In the event of dispute or interference, funds shall transfer to alternate recipientees with no bloodline requirement. Merit and character shall guide legacy." Below that, she wrote a name. Maya Henderson, one of the scholarship students her estate now supported. A knock came that evening at the inn's small event hall. Florence attended the scholarship dinner in a navy skirt suit and soft-heeled shoes. The guests were modest, the food simple, but the gratitude in the air was richer than any five-star brunch. Toward the end of the night, a young woman approached, early 20s, sharp bob haircut, a portfolio clutched tightly to her chest. "Ms. Langley?" she asked. Florence looked up from her tea. "Yes?" "I'm Maya. I'm one of your recipients." Florence smiled gently. "I'm glad the grant found you." Maya hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "You remind me of my grandmother. She raised me, strong, silent, sharp, like you don't need to say much for people to understand exactly where you stand." Florence's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. "That's the goal." Maya gave her a quick, genuine hug, then returned to her table. Florence stared at her untouched dessert, then slowly reached into her bag and pulled out her planner. She opened to a blank page and wrote a single sentence at the top. Sometimes, family must be chosen, especially when the original draft failed the test. She underlined it once. The wind picked up slightly as the doors opened behind her. A server brought out the final course, warm berry cobbler in tiny ramekins. Florence declined. She didn't need sweetness to end the night. She needed silence, resolve, forward motion. Back in her room, she checked her phone. Nothing from Amber, but one unread message from her son, David. It began, "Flo, I think you're being a little cruel. She's young. You know how kids are." Florence didn't finish reading. She stared at it for 3 seconds, then opened her recorder app, hit record, and said only one sentence. "If loyalty means defending harm, then I owe no one anything." She saved the file, named it, for Lydia, if he ever contests. Then she powered down the phone, and turned to the window where the sea darkened but the horizon stayed visible. Tomorrow would bring another letter, or maybe another plea. But tonight, she'd drawn a line no wind could erase. Florence woke to the ping of her tablet. Not a calendar alert or a donation receipt this time, but a flagged message from Lydia. Subject, URGENT, filing attached. The PDF preview glared from the screen. Florence tapped it open with the side of her finger, setting her teacup down untouched. Claim of elder exploitation and manipulation. Filed by Amber Langley. Florence read the title 3 times before scrolling down. Amber's attorney, someone Florence had never heard of, was claiming that Florence's recent changes to her trust reflected mental confusion, possible undue influence, and erratic financial behavior inconsistent with a sound eldercare plan. In other words, Amber was accusing her of incompetence. Florence leaned back in her armchair, eyes narrowed. Her robe hung neatly around her like armor. The sea outside her window was calm, but her pulse sharpened into something colder than fury. She picked up the phone and dialed. Lydia answered on the first ring. Already received. Already drafted the response. I take it she thinks I'm weak now? Florence asked. She thinks money makes people forget how well documented you are, Lydia replied. Remind her. 24 hours later, the counterfiling landed. So precise, so airtight, it practically breathed litigation-proof confidence. Attached were Florence's notarized mental competency evaluations from the prior year, 3 decades of organized financial files, 2 video recordings of her estate planning meetings, time-stamped and witnessed, the digital trust log showing every change logged with 2-factor authentication. Lydia's note at the bottom was simple. Dismissal requested on grounds of baseless accusation and documented autonomy. The judge reviewing the preliminary filing issued the ruling the next morning. Case dismissed. No standing. No merit. No hearing. Florence received the email in her private inbox. She didn't cheer. She didn't exhale. She just poured a fresh glass of iced tea and forwarded the ruling to Lydia with 1 sentence. She wanted the suite. All she got was a subpoena. That evening, Florence returned to the suite, this time not for spa treatments or silence, but to host. She had invited 5 young women, each a recipient of her scholarship fund, all students she had selected for grit, grace, and untold potential. They wore simple dresses and shy smiles, holding their name tags like fragile tickets. Dinner was set in the corner lounge of the presidential floor. White linen, string lights, soft jazz curling through the walls. Florence stood to make a toast. No bloodline guarantees an inheritance, she said, echoing Dr. Monroe's words from the gala. And you don't inherit respect. You earn it, one honest choice at a time. They raised their glasses. Sparkling cider caught the light like promise. The women dined slowly with laughter that came in bursts, first nervous, then full. Florence listened more than she spoke. But when one of the students asked how she built her legacy, Florence answered softly, by letting go of the ones who assumed they deserved it. Later, when the guests had left and the suite had gone quiet again, Florence sat at the desk and tapped open her voice recorder. She titled the new file, Chapter 12, Contested, then Cleared. She pressed record. They said I was confused. They mistook silence for weakness, just like they always had. But my clarity? It was the thing that buried their entitlement. She paused, then added, Don't wait to defend your worth. Document it. Seal it. And if they ever question it, be ready to win quietly. She stopped the recording and backed it up to 2 encrypted folders. Outside, the wind shifted. A storm was coming, but not the kind Florence feared. She stood at the window, arms folded, watching the waves rise. There would be fallout. Amber wouldn't vanish overnight. But tonight, there was paperwork stronger than rage, and witnesses who now called her mentor, not grandmother. Her legacy no longer lived in bloodlines. It lived in proof. And tomorrow? Tomorrow she'd start writing the chapter called Aftermath. Florence hadn't planned on publishing her memoir. It started as voice notes, archived reflections to clarify her estate decisions. But Lydia, ever the strategist, had floated the idea over lunch one afternoon. You're not writing a memoir, Florence. You're crafting a blueprint. Now, without any marketing push or fanfare, the pre-order link, quietly released through an elder justice advocacy group, was gaining unexpected traction. By the end of the week, Unburied, Boundaries, Bloodlines, and Becoming Your Own Advocate had slipped into the trending nonfiction queue for legal rights communities. Book clubs in 3 cities requested advance copies. A podcast run by former probate litigators mentioned it twice, without naming Florence directly, but with enough breadcrumbs that anyone following the saga could piece it together. Amber did. Florence was reviewing her travel calendar when the message arrived. Amber, take it down. I'll apologize. Just, please. No punctuation, no emojis. Just panic thinly veiled as repentance. Florence stared at the screen for a moment, then locked the phone without replying. Across town, Amber was spiraling, messaging mutuals, issuing vague posts like storm signals. Even family will sell your silence. Watch who you trust. The likes were half what they used to be. Her comment section? Split down the middle. Maybe they just finally saw who you are. Unsubscribed. Lydia, meanwhile, had anticipated the shift in tone. She had already prepped the final letter. Florence received a scanned copy before dinner. To Amber Langley. Subject: Final clarification. Estate access. Dear Ms. Langley, this letter serves as formal confirmation that you are not named in any current or future estate documentation related to Ms. Florence Langley. You are neither designated as a beneficiary nor eligible under conditional clauses. Any inquiry regarding access will be logged and declined. Sincerely, Lydia Hall, Esquire Westbury and Locke Legal. Florence printed it, folded it in thirds, slid it into the back of her will binder. That Thursday, she received a call from the Women's Legal Foundation of Tri-County. Would she speak on intergenerational estate conflict and self-advocacy? Florence's response was brief. Send me the time. I'll bring my notes. At the luncheon, she wore a slate gray wrap dress and low-heeled black shoes. No jewelry except the wedding band she never removed. The room was filled with lawyers, social workers, widows, and quietly exhausted matriarchs who had all been called selfish, cruel, or confused for reclaiming their narratives. When it was her turn to speak, Florence walked to the podium and paused before the mic. My name is Florence Langley. I'm a retired teacher, widow, and executor of my own peace. A ripple of laughter. Warm, not mocking. She continued, I've been called cold for protecting what I've built, disloyal for not funding dysfunction. But let me be clear, you don't get written in after writing someone off. Legacy doesn't come with a birth certificate, it comes with a receipt. The applause was quiet at first, then full. Afterward, a woman in her 60s approached her with tears in her eyes. You said what I've been trying to put into words for a decade. Florence simply nodded and pressed a business card into her hand, not for Lydia, but for the grant that had helped fund her own estate revision journey. Back home that evening, Florence lit a small vanilla candle and poured a single glass of lemon tonic. She pulled a photograph from the luncheon, one of her standing at the podium, jaw set, eyes clear. She slipped it into a black frame, then placed it beside her will binder on the bookshelf. No spotlight, no applause. Just evidence that the woman in the photo had chosen herself, and for once, stayed chosen. As she turned to head upstairs, her phone buzzed again. Not Amber, not David. A notification. Unburied had just reached number 3 in Elder Legal Empowerment. Florence didn't smile, but she did whisper, now they're reading what they refused to hear, and clicked off the light. Amber Langley stood at the front desk of the Shorepine Hotel, lip gloss faded, voice trembling. There has to be a mistake. I have a history with this property. The concierge didn't blink. Yes, ma'am. That's why you're on. The internal risk ledger. Amber blinked. What does that mean? It means we cannot honor a reservation under your name, nor under any affiliate names connected to your prior flagged bookings. Across town, another hotel, the Arcadia View Suites, had already done the same. 2 properties, 2 blocks on her digital footprint, one for a bounced luxury booking, one for a flagged cosigner credit card issued under a trust she no longer had access to. Florence's trust update had completed 2 days ago. Every card tied to Amber's identity had been severed, cleanly, legally, irrevocably. One of those cards had also carried Troy's name. When the last transaction failed at a rented BMW desk, he called Amber from the curb. "You should have warned me," he snapped. "You should have paid something," Amber hissed back. He hung up before she could finish the sentence. That night, Amber opened a GoFundMe page titled "Starting Fresh After Family Fallout." The description was vague, full of passive phrasing and hashtagged heartbreak. Donors? 3. Total raised after 72 hours, $94. The comments stung more than the silence. Not funding entitlement. Your grandma's the blueprint. Meanwhile, Florence was reviewing a quarterly distribution file with Lydia. One line item had been highlighted for reallocation, a fund originally earmarked for legacy travel. Florence crossed it out with clean strokes. "Transfer the full amount," she said. "Housing stability grants, young single parents, no influencer residencies." That week, $20,000 landed in a foundation that funded rental relief for mothers under 30. 3 days later, a message arrived in Florence's inbox. Subject: "Thank you for my roof." "Hi, Ms. Langley. I'm 19 with a 2-year-old and was days away from eviction. I didn't know your name until someone told me where the money came from. I just wanted to say, thank you. You gave us a roof. You gave me a second chance to be someone my daughter can count on. I don't know your story, but I felt your kindness anyway. Shayla P. Shelter Client." Now Tenant Florence read the message twice, then typed slowly, deliberately. Subject: your roof. Use it wisely. That's all I ever wanted. FL. She paused, then added, "And build forward, not back." She hit send and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the sky had shifted to spring gray, the kind of overcast that made everything feel softly lit. The wind moved gently through her yard. Nothing sharp, nothing harsh. Inside, her home was quiet. No unpaid echoes, no generational shame still whispering from the walls. Florence crossed the room and opened her document binder. She slipped Shayla's email into a plastic sleeve labeled "Real Impact." Then she flipped back to the original estate plan, years old now, stiff with outdated intention. At the top of the page, once reserved for family notes, she wrote, "Blood didn't raise me. Character did. So that's what I fund now." Down the block, a delivery truck passed with no notice. In a different part of the city, Amber was live streaming again, her voice thinner, trying to reclaim oxygen in a room that had already been emptied. Florence didn't watch. Instead, she opened her recorder one more time and spoke a single sentence. "Closure isn't an event. It's a decision to keep the door locked even if they still knock." She titled the entry, "Suite Closed," and pressed save. The phone call came just past 9 while Florence was trimming a loose thread from her evening shawl. She let it ring once before answering, out of courtesy, not curiosity. "Hi, Ma," David said, like nothing in the world was cracked. "You got a second?" Florence sat. "Go ahead." There was a pause, then the tone she'd come to recognize over the years, the mix of condescension and concern that men used when they wanted to correct without appearing controlling. "I think you're being a little cruel," David said. "Amber's young. She made mistakes. You've always been so composed, so strong. I mean, is this really who you want to be remembered as?" Florence didn't reply. He went on. "She's spiraling. Her boyfriend bailed. She's dealing with cancel culture online, Ma. And now there's your book trending like some indictment. You know how kids are. They lash out." Still, Florence said nothing. "I just think," he continued, "that this whole thing, cutting people out, recording everything, locking down your estate like it's Fort Knox, isn't the mother I grew up with. You used to give people grace." Florence's thumb hovered over the screen. Then slowly, she tapped the record icon on her backup device. His voice continued. "You can't just erase family because you're upset. Don't be the one who breaks the bloodline." She ended the call without a word. 30 minutes later, she emailed the voice file to Lydia. Subject: Additional documentation. Text: Please amend my will to reflect a no contest clause for David Langley. Note: Should he challenge, he is to be treated as having predeceased me. She watched the upload bar move across the screen like a final curtain. That weekend, Florence attended the Northern Educators Retirement Gala, hosted at a restored civic hall downtown. She wore dove-gray silk with her silver comb nestled in her hair. Margot accompanied her in pearls and punchy red lipstick. When the host called Florence to the stage, the applause was genuine, not out of pity, not out of spectacle. Real, earned. A pillar of dignity, the MC said, voice ringing against the chandeliered ceiling. She taught generations, not just in curriculum, but in character. Ms. Langley, you taught us that boundaries are not cold. They are warm shields for weary souls. Florence stepped to the microphone, her heels steady on the wooden floor. I used to think legacy was about who carried your last name. Now I understand. It's about who carries your values. The crowd didn't erupt. It hushed, and stayed that way. Back home, she changed into her robe, steeped a fresh cup of cinnamon tea, and pulled out her healthcare directive file. She opened the previous version, saw David's name listed under primary medical advocate, and calmly crossed it out. Below, she wrote, Margot Ellison, trusted executor and health proxy. Reason, proven loyalty under pressure. Then she signed it, dated it, scanned it. She placed the paper into the updated folder labeled Directive, Final Standing. Her phone buzzed an hour later. David, she's spiraling. We'll talk when you calm down. Florence stared at the message. No punctuation, no apology, just deflection. She swiped left, deleted it. The screen went blank as if the words had never existed. Outside, the trees rustled against the windows like old secrets too tired to knock again. Florence rose and locked the front door, out of habit, out of principle, out of finality. In her office, the lamp cast a soft yellow pool across her desk. She pulled out her recorder, pressed record, and said, Bloodlines are biology. But legacy? That's who shows up when you're outnumbered and stays when you're not useful. She titled the file, Bloodline Break? Confirmed. Then backed it up to both cloud and flash drive. The night settled into quiet. And for the first time in months, there were no alerts, no requests, just peace. But morning would come with a message she hadn't expected, a new name and a new claim. The ballroom at the Eldridge Hilton gleamed beneath amber uplighting, floor buffed to a slick sheen, scent of warmed hors d'oeuvres drifting like perfume. Florence stepped out of the elevator in a deep plum pantsuit, heels clicking like punctuation, Margot trailing behind her with a wink and a glittering clutch. The banquet wasn't hers. It was for a corporate philanthropy group she'd once consulted, back before she'd learned that family sometimes included strangers who held your hand without strings. As she approached the reception line, Florence saw her. Amber. In a server's uniform, hair pulled too tight, smile too wide, carrying a tray of miniature crab cakes like it was silver armor. She spotted Florence, too, just for a second, then quickly looked away. Florence didn't pause. She walked past her granddaughter with the same grace she used to cross graduation stages and hospital hallways. Measured, unfazed, high-heeled dignity wrapped in silence. No words, no warning, no rescue. Just the rustle of silk and the sharp line of someone who had already said her last goodbye. Margot leaned in, voice low. You're the only woman I know who upgraded after being downgraded. Florence allowed the corners of her mouth to tilt, but only briefly. The next morning, she sat on a panel at the State Women's Housing Justice Conference. Her nameplate read, Florence Langley, estate advocate and author. The woman to her left was a retired judge. The one to her right, a policy analyst. Yet when Florence spoke, the room leaned in more than it had all day. There's a reason so many women hesitate to say no, she told the crowd. We're raised to believe silence is maturity, but sometimes silence is complicity. I chose another kind. Applause rose like a tide, slow but sincere. After the panel, she stepped into the hall to retrieve her coat when a young reporter from the Ledger-Tribune approached with notebook in hand. Ms. Langley, quick question. Some people have described your memoir as a revenge saga. Care to comment? Florence held the reporter's gaze. It's not about revenge, she said, tone crisp but calm. It's about remembering who you are after everyone's tried to write over you. The reporter didn't ask a second question. Later, as the panelists gathered for closing remarks, Florence was handed a velvet box. Inside sat a crystal dessert plate, etched delicately with her name and a phrase beneath it, still standing, still serving. She blinked once, then lifted it out slowly, hands steady. It wasn't gaudy, it wasn't performative, it was acknowledgement. Quiet, permanent, real. Margot met her at the coat check, reading the inscription over her shoulder. I knew you'd get a plate back someday. This one won't break. They left through the main doors as the sky dimmed over the city. Inside the ballroom, Amber cleared glasses from abandoned tables. No one looked her way, not anymore. That evening, Florence returned home and set the plate beside her memoir proof copy on the bookshelf. Not high up, not hidden, just there, like a bookmark between lives. She poured herself a glass of elderflower tonic, no garnish this time, and stepped out onto the porch. The trees rustled again, but this time they sounded less like whispers and more like applause. Her phone buzzed. Not Amber, not David. An email. Subject, proposal invitation. State Grant Council on Elder Women's Autonomy. Florence opened it. They wanted her voice, her vote, her story. Not as a relic, but as a blueprint. She tapped interested, then scrolled to the signature line and typed, happy to serve, on my own terms. And as she hit send, a thought passed through her like the wind brushing the corners of her porch. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you reclaim. Out loud. The message arrived just after 5 a.m. Amber, please. I'm sorry. Can we talk before you go? No punctuation, no salutation. Just the same familiar desperation, this time packaged as last-minute redemption. Florence read it in silence from her window seat in the coastal suite. The bay outside was barely beginning to glow, sky blushing with the earliest edge of sun. She didn't reply. She didn't even tap read. Instead, she deleted it. No hesitation. No second screen. Then reached for her travel clutch, slid the phone inside, zipped the leather closed, and turned the brass clasp until it clicked. Let the message sit in the past. Let the silence answer for her. Downstairs, her driver loaded the last of her luggage into the town car's trunk. Just one suitcase, one journal. No deadweight, no heirlooms, nothing borrowed. By the time Florence arrived at the port, the ship was preparing final call. The SS Caravel stood at dock like a promise, white, polished, and elegantly quiet. Not a party cruise, not a networking cruise, just peace at sea, stretched out over 12 uninterrupted nights. Florence stepped out of the car wearing navy linen pants, a cream silk blouse, and her mother's antique wristwatch, face cracked, still ticking. Margot was already at the gangway in oversized sunglasses and a linen trench. You packed light? She said with a grin. I've already offloaded everything that didn't serve me, Florence replied. Most of it talked too much. They laughed softly and boarded, shoulder to shoulder. The sea air carried no noise from the land, just the scent of salt, distance, and clean departure. At 10 a.m. sharp, the horn blew once, long, low, and decisive, a sound that had nothing to do with warning and everything to do with release. By noon, they were standing at the forward deck railing, champagne glasses in hand, watching the coastline blur into mist. Margot lifted her flute. To being unbothered. Florence clinked gently. To exits, not apologies. They drank. The bubbles whispered like approval. Later, back in her private stateroom, Florence placed her clutch in the drawer, locked it, and sat at the desk facing the window. Her journal lay open, bookmarked with a hotel receipt and a photo from the legal luncheon, the one where she stood behind a podium instead of behind someone else's expectations. She flipped to the final page, the last page. She uncapped her fountain pen, paused for breath, and wrote with clean, precise strokes. Final note. The only plate she'll ever take from me again is this one. She underlined it once, then slipped the journal into her leather folder marked Personal Archive, Final Draft. The edges of the folder were soft with use, but the inside was clean, organized, deliberate. Everything Florence intended to pass on was inside, nothing more, and certainly nothing less. She returned to the deck at sunset. The wind teased loose strands from her bun, and the ocean, far below, trailed behind the ship like a ribbon Florence had finally unknotted. Margot joined her with a refill in each hand. "You ever think about writing a sequel?" she asked, smirking. Florence shook her head, eyes on the horizon. Sequels mean someone didn't finish their lesson. They stood side by side, quiet for a long time. Finally, Margot asked, "So what do you call this chapter?" Florence didn't blink. "Freedom." She closed her eyes briefly. The ship moved forward, steady and unstoppable, cutting through the Atlantic like ink across parchment. Below them, the waves made no apology. They didn't need to. They carried only what was meant to float. Florence turned once more toward the sea, her voice barely louder than the wind. "She snatched my plate." A pause. The breeze curled her scarf like punctuation. "I reserved my legacy." And for the first time in a very long time, Florence— Langley smiled.